Welcome to Tennis 2020, real talk, real people, real life, and boy has it been real life. It's been an amazing, rotten kind of 36 hours for me. Yesterday morning, pre-dawn, one of my two mentors really in this world passed away from COVID-19, so the first time I've really been struck by it. He was 95 years old. He was my high school football coach. A lot of what I do as a coach, I do because of who he was. So that's what's been going on in my last 24 hours. And I want to thank Austin Tennis Academy and EKH Media for making this broadcast possible. My name's Dewey Evans, and today we're taking a trip across the pond to Croatia. We have Hrvoje Zmajic, and I probably butchered that name atrociously. He is a former development officer for ITF and Tennis Europe. He is currently an international tennis consultant, and we're blessed to get to talk to him. How are you today?
Hi everybody in the States, and first of all, I'm sharing also your experience with this set around the world with coronavirus. Here in Croatia, also stressful already over the month. We are closed down, but in the last week, the numbers affected people, let's say, keeping this, and the trend is that we are slowly getting out of this trouble.
So I see a lot of Europe trying to open back up in the news, that little by little, different segments of it. What does it look like for tennis in Croatia specifically, but what else are you seeing, the prospects being of tennis starting again in Europe?
Yeah, Croatia is in a very similar position in other European nations, and yesterday I had a chance to also take part in one conference call with my colleagues from over 15 nations in Europe. It was organized by the ITF. It was actually the meeting of the ITF tutors and experts, and tell you that across Europe this is closed down, but with some flexibility in the northern Europe, where perhaps you can play recreationally, but not like organized tennis coaching. And here in the south, Croatia, Bosnia, pretty tough, and people are quite restricted in them at all, especially in sports. So I believe that at present this strikes our sport very strongly, and actually the consequences we will feel for. But if it will take for another, let's say, few weeks, my impression is that people are ready to catch up and then to restart the activities before the summer with a real launch of all the programs, perhaps after the summer holidays, school holidays in September.
How long have you been closed down for at this point in time?
Majority of Europe closed down for already 4 weeks, and the prospects are that at least for another 2-3 weeks the life will not turn to the normal, and also the sport activities will be still on hold. We just heard that yesterday they have postponed like a relaxation of the measurement until the 11th of May. In Croatia, here in my country, they said that they will prolong it, but they didn't specify how long. So basically what I know from my colleagues when I talk to them, yes, mid of May is the first, let's say, dates that we could restart our lives more closer to normality. So what altogether would be, let's say, 6 to 7 weeks.
Let's talk, and you can fill me in a little bit on the structure of Tennis Europe. So here in the United States, we have the USTA as the umbrella. under which everything within the states falls, and then we have sections. So Florida is its own section. California is broken into Northern California, Southern California. By far the largest section is the southern section. It's 9 states. It's huge, and apparently Georgia had seceded from the southern section. It by itself would have been the 4th largest section in the country, and southern still would have been the largest. So that's kind of how it's broken up here. And what about, their Tennis Europe? Is that the overarching governing body under which things fall?
Tennis Europe is actually a branch of the ITF, of International Federation. It's a regional association that actually includes all 50 European nations. And when we look about the regions, then obviously, also politically, we have some kind of like a Western European nations that have a lot of similarities, and really from the past, as Eastern European nations, starting with, let's say, Croatia, that was just in the middle, and then from Hungary, Bulgaria, Belarus, Russia, and then up to Armenia and Georgia in the Caucasus, that were actually part of the so-called Eastern European nations. Of course, another region, the Nordic countries, Sweden, Finland, Denmark, and Iceland. And of course, there are some similarities between the countries in the south because of the very different climate. For example, in south of Spain, Italy, south of Czech, Greece, UK, all year long, actually, without imports. Totally opposite from the Nordic countries, where perhaps 8-9 months you are playing indoors.
Right.
So basically, all of these countries are coming together in Tennis Europe and creating some international junior competitions as a need. And I think one of the reasons European tennis became strong in last years.
So it is very much like the United States Tennis Association is, where if you are playing tennis in Michigan someplace in January, you're definitely playing indoors. And if you're in Florida, you're playing year round. So there is a very different climate. And so the ITF with the development officers, what's the role of a development officer? Is that kind of what we might call a national coach, or something different?
Perhaps it's good to start from pretty beginning, when ITF actually started development programs, and that was in the 80s. And basically they organized it for the less developed regions in the world, as, for example, African. And then at the beginning of 90s, after the fall of Yugoslavia and Soviet Union, tennis as a game was in threat in this region of Europe, and then ITF and Tennis Europe together launched development programs also in Europe. So the role of development officer was, first of all, to examine the needs, and then actually to some support at the beginning, basically with the equipment, and later on player development and also coach education programs. Today, actually, all the European nations are able to benefit from development programming on their level of development.
So you go, when you were a development officer, your role was you would go into somewhere that wanted to develop tennis, and you would help them identify the necessary resources and how to procure those resources. Is that fairly accurate?
Yeah. Yes, had some like a standard programs, let's call it. Player development programs with organizing international touring teams, and actually then we have been organizing like a specific tournaments, like selection tournaments, where we have identified players who have been selected in the team, and then provided the them to for 6 weeks during the summer holidays. In addition, also, we try to help the federations in educating coaches very much, because you know that coaches are one of the key pillars of tennis everywhere in the world. And ITF do it very much with the support of Olympic Solidarity, because in the countries like Moldova, for example, it's very difficult that coaches would be able to finance themselves in education. So these programs have been vital for actually improving the coaching skills of the coaches there.
Coach education is not a mandatory thing in the United States, and I know other places in the world it goes as far as to have license. You have to be licensed in order to hang out your shingles, so to speak, to work. And is there a standard across Europe for what coaches have, or do individual countries set up their own programs with coach education, or maybe do the larger countries have their own and then other countries fall under an ITF standard?
10 is developed countries, France, Germany, Italy, Switzerland. They are actually having traditionally their own coach education systems that in terms of the volume of the education is very different, and ranging from, let's say, 200 hours to perhaps 2,000 hours altogether. So it's pretty different in different countries. And in the countries that have not been able to establish their own coach education systems, ITF is actually sharing with them their ITF syllabi, the coach licensing program, and actually do it for the federation. So basically, in agreement with federation, ITF is then sending tutors, and they are conducting the courses there. I have to say that also there are some countries in Europe where licensing is not mandatory, but most of the countries licensing is mandatory, and there is a, how to say, movement and a policy that it became a profession and standardized profession, like to be a lawyer. So I believe that in Europe, in short time, that will be mandatory in all European countries.
So now, as a consultant, how does that change? You know, do you go into countries that want more in terms of what they're doing, or places that I guess, can you explain to me as a consultant now, what do you do?
As a consultant, I'm still also working together with ITF. I am also still educating coaches like a ITF tutor at different level for beginner, from the beginner up to the high performance players. Also, I'm consulting some countries, like for example Finnish Tennis Association, and helping them to establish national junior performance program, development program. And also I speak at different continuous education events, like national conferences and similar events.
What types of information come from those conferences that you speak at, which might be different? I know you might not know what happens in the U.S., but I see the Irish Coaches Conference, you know, being a big thing, and some others. What is it that happens at those conferences that's of benefit to the coaches and the national federations? Is it designed more towards just coaches, or is it, you know, program administrators also?
Conferences organized by the federations usually are aimed for coaches, and very often what is not justified, to be honest with you, we are all more focused on performance players, even though we know that let's call it standard club players are the majority in our sport. So it's always about, let's say, sophisticating coaching skills and how to better play. Even though also here in many countries we are fighting now much more with having the right number of players, and that we are not losing the players to other sports and activities. So I have emphasized that this is very important. It is important to us actually the focus on educating the coaches in terms of making better business. What's very important with actually producing better players by improving coaching skills.
So that's an interesting concept, right? There are some countries who believe having more players, so if we build the base wider and concentrate there, that just naturally the pinnacle, the sharp end, will be higher. And then there are other countries which kind of say, well, we don't really care, how many, if there are courts full all over the country. What we want is we want those players who will compete for us internationally, represent us at, the Olympics and Grand Slam events. And do you find that most of Europe is the latter? Or do you see a disparity between some countries looking to build the base and then others who really are focused at the top?
I think it's pretty much related also to the past. Now I have to come back to what I said at the beginning about Eastern and Western Europe. In Eastern Europe, sport was always, focused on performance and having results in international competitions, and that it was like competing with the West, which is better. So I believe that still now the attitude is more dominant in Eastern Europe, where actually the people are always, when they ask me also to talk about something, they're interested much more in making better players. In Western Europe, the focus is very much about the whole sport, that you need to have from the volunteers, clubs, recreational players, seniors, and then of course to have a high performance player representing the country, and we see them all proud of them in TV. As the example of the numbers, I can give you country, Croatia, that altogether we have around 2,000 registered competitive players from 10 and under up to the men's and women's. And at our numbers in the top 100, you are amazed. We have 3-4 top 100 players, just such a number of competitive players playing. So yeah, it's not that bigger numbers immediately will produce more top players, but obviously if you don't have a sport, the players, also the best players in the environment which they can develop there. So in my opinion, having a synergy of these two areas is very important, and that should be taken into consideration the specificities of the countries. Like Croatia, for sure, is different with 4 million people compared to the States with 300 million. We cannot really make the same, obviously.
Yes, particularly on the men's side. It seems like if we were to go back to when they added tennis into the Olympics, at that point in time, a lot of the Eastern European countries, if you were at a little bit of lag, right? But 10 years after that, something like that, you started seeing a big rise in those players who were competing at the Grand Slam level and doing well, right? Do you think that had anything to do with why was such a resurgence in tennis in that part of the world?
I think it has. There are two things here I would like to the first one is that there were also before much more top level players in Eastern Europe, but they were not allowed to go outside and play. Just perhaps 1 or 2 players from the Soviet Union have been allowed to play, like Kafelnikov, I remember for sure well, but the 20-30 players that were excellent players, they have not been allowed to travel around and play on the pro circuits. So the players have been there also before. By including tennis in the Olympics, it opens the support and the money that goes through Olympic solidarity, especially in these European countries, that is the fall of the union, the old system. So I think that it all helped that several players some additional funding that allow them to travel, compete, and develop their to the top.
In the U.S., a lot of parents complain that there are so many foreign players playing in the U.S. college system. But I haven't heard you mention players looking to compete at U.S. universities. Is that something that nobody really thinks about until it's such time as they become of that age and maybe they haven't broken through at the professional level, and so then they use it as a fallback?
Putting now a very complex topic, and for me, first of all, I have to say that what you have in States in terms of connecting sports and education is perhaps the best system in the world. Now, the best system for the sport is the one thing, and then actually developing these top professionals different. I believe you are aware that in Eastern Europe, very often it's at the age of 10, 11, start to have 4 or 5 individual practices per week, starting to travel around Europe at the age of 11. And what it means is that they really accelerated their development compared to the very talented players staying in the clubs or playing only in one state in the States without traveling around. Because playing tennis doesn't forehands and back to be used to eating food, different cultures, different weathers, conditions, and so on and so on. So I believe by this, what happened is that that gave an edge to players that actually very early left for regular schooling. Very often it started at 13, 14 here in Europe still. And I'm very much against it, to be honest with you, because obviously when you don't succeed in tennis, you don't have other career. And I know many more players that didn't succeed than they really succeeded in a pro game. So for me, I believe strongly that tennis as a sport in long term has really a chance for succeed as a sport in long term if we connect it more with school system. We're starting now to be more and more also, let's say, in the UK, important part, university tennis. I know guys, so I know about it a little bit. And countries are trying to create this like a dual years, very important for the for French. So for sure, college system is very important. Now, how to use it and which are perhaps some challenges. Another perhaps topic. I don't need to give you a badge. I don't know enough about the States for sure.
Yeah, it's unfortunately I believe it's all about to change because tennis is what's referred to as a non-revenue sport at the university level in the United States, and almost the entire sports programs for universities are funded through television money, which comes from U.S. football and basketball. And because they lost all the basketball money this year, and there's real talk that they might lose all of the football money this fall because it's just not going to be safe, or the players won't be willing to play, that they're going to be cutting non-revenue sports. As a matter of fact, we have a college here in Austin, Texas, St. Edward's University, who both of their men's and women's coaches were former coaches at the program where I work, and we've sent some players there pretty consistently. They just announced yesterday that effective at the end of this semester that they're dropping both the men's and women's programs. That's going to probably be the case in a lot of schools. just it's not, there's no money there at this point in time for the sports that can't float on their own bottom, so to speak. So that's going to change. I don't know whether it will change it in that there'll be less foreign players that they'll be awarding scholarships to, though there's always going to be a pressure to win at that level. So they're just really just looking for the best players. It's really nationality agnostic in most cases. They're just who can help us win, because that's what the mandate is from the athletic directors, is we've got to win. We got to win matches. We got to win championships. So that's going to change a little bit. But from the Tennis Europe standpoint, do you see things changing because different borders will open at different times, and those players might not be able to or not be as willing to travel as readily for the time being, because there are, certainly some places that are a little more hot spots in terms of coronavirus and some that have less? Is that going to affect how players travel?
At present, Tennis Europe and ITF are actually setting a date like mid of July about starting international competitions again.
Yeah, I think it was July 12th. Isn't that what I read this week?
Something like that. But just 2 weeks ago, I spoke with a colleague of mine inside Tennis Europe, and they're still not, sure that they will start. And that's, of course, is tough, because that's a problem situation that nobody knows how long it takes. So I played and B, plan C, and he told me also on the plan D.
Yeah.
So these are the things that now at the present create problems for us. Personally, I believe that in Europe, that actually from the countries that don't have strong national competitions will start to travel in Europe as soon as the borders will be open and allowed. Another question is how long they will be able to do it. I think that the economic situation will go even worse for a longer time. Especially, I'm very worried about how many players and federations will be able to afford traveling young players, national competition, how it will reflect on the quality and opportunity for the future.
I think there's a lot to be figured out, and I suspect the reason we're at that July 11th date for international competitions is nobody wants to push it too far out, because if the situation changes for the better, right, we don't want to be pushed so far out that now there's a huge opportunity lost, that we've lost the entire summer season in the Northern Hemisphere. And it's, I think it's going to take some time to flush this out. I'm very interested in what it will look like opening back up, because there's going to have to be some period of time once players are able to practice before they're actually competing. That everybody's working on getting more fit and stronger and all those things, but that's different than being in tennis shape, where you're chasing balls and you have good timing, and then there's going to be all those little injuries that come when players get back out on the court and they don't temper the speed that they're getting back at it. They want to just full blast right away, and people are going to get hurt. And I think
my feeling here in Europe, eastern part of the Europe, that players use the chance to play very soon when they will know it's open. Of course, knowing how it looks like, now of course I'm thinking loudly. Perhaps by 15th of May, beginning of June, will be possible to practice, to move around freely. So if it really will be like that, and they have the competition mid of July, most of the players will be ready. 5-6 weeks, they will be ready, because I am convinced that that players are doing something in some of physical fitness, doing some small stuff and so on. So they will be hungry of tennis, and perhaps that's also not bad in one way. So that will also show to the young players. I have a son, for example, that gets for granted everything what he has, and now for months he cannot go. He doesn't meet friends. He start to ask, but yeah, now he start to realize that not for granted, and it's not a must to play tennis. It's a privilege to play tennis.
I think there's a lot that going to have to get figured out. I had someone that I spoke to a couple of times and that we're doing some collaborations with in southern Spain, and he made a prediction about a week and a half ago that there will be no international tennis in 2020, that it's done. I don't know whether he's prophetic or, I know he wants to get back at it as much as anybody else, and he's working hard with his players, and they're scattered all over the world at the moment, as they've all had to leave Spain, and some of them were at competitions outside of Spain at that point in time. I think some were in Portugal and some were some other places, and they went back to their home countries. But I think we don't know. I think if we were to have this conversation in 2 weeks, it might be very different than what it is today. I hope it's the best.
I'm looking at my own job, hoping for my, I would say, optimistic forecast, and for myself also to start being able to work again from August. But I'm not sure. Fortunately, I'm not sure. Many coaches here also, of course, as in the States also now without any income, and I look for all activities. I really hope that it can restart in a month, let's say like this, because that will be very important in order to keep some contact, that the period of the time is not extending to half a year. Because also for the it's very important that they connected, and the players with this. But I don't know for myself either. So we will see where
Yeah, and I don't know. I've yet to hear of a professional level name player who's been diagnosed as positive with COVID-19 or coronavirus. So far so good. But I suspect it's only a matter of time. That I read something where the past president of the USTA, Katrina Adams, actually had COVID-19.
I didn't hear that. The last, I want to emphasize that I believe it's going to stay positive at the moment and find our own, let's say, focus. I can share with you from my conversation that I mentioned at the beginning of our conversation that many federations are trying also to create some online activities for the players with, let's say, sharing some drills for the kids, what they can do at home, analyzing the matches with the performance by national coaches, and then to do some webinars and even courses, online courses for the coaches. Because now when the coaches have time, perhaps it's a good opportunity that we enhance, improve coaching skills, and just get ready that we are better when we have the opportunity again.
I think that's the missing piece. A lot of the bigger tennis programs are doing a pretty good job of staying connected with their community, their players, providing resources for them to practice at home as best they can, do some fitness things. We actually do a group fitness Zoom every afternoon that we have about 75 of the kids that are in our program being led by the strength and conditioning directors who are actually doing the exercises with them. And it's been very well attended. We're on our third week, or the end of our third week now. And it's been really good. And I know that there are programs everywhere who are continuing to send out individualized programs and creating resources. The USTA is doing a lot of what you're talking about, Tennis Europe and ITF doing, of creating webinars and things. I think here the missing piece has always coach education. Coach education just isn't at the same level in the States. It's more like everybody just does their own thing. And sometimes their own thing is really good, and sometimes it's not so good. But I'm glad that you're involved in Tennis Europe.
No, but I would say a lot of available information, especially in the States. So for the people that are interested in to improve, there is always a ability. If federation is to organize ability and prepare for the coaches, is even, you know, that ITF, for example, now gives for free the ITF Academy with a lot of presentation courses for free for all the coaches around the world, and some other federations are doing the same effort. It's supporting and it's motivating the people to use the time in a, let's say, right way.
Mm-hmm. I've had some kind of bug for 5 weeks now, and it was pretty bad at one point in time. So I have this leftover lingering cough, and you know. Thank you.
No corona, I hope.
Or I hope if there's a lasting immunity and it's, you know, on the back end, because it was pretty bad for a while. It's just a little cough at this point in time. I wouldn't be upset to know that I've had it and I now have some level of immunity, you know, because I certainly don't want it in the future. So, at least not with this lingering cough, so I have a respiratory something. So it wouldn't be a good time to get it right now. Thank you for your time and sharing what's going on in Europe with us, and I wish you all the best. I hope you can get back at it soon. I think we're going to close the show. If you could just hang on for a second while we close the show and come back and chat with you for just a second. This has been Tennis 2020, real life, real people, real talk. And so that's what's going on in Europe. They're in the same position we're in here in the States, in that they're closed down. They're looking at ways to get back open again. They're chomping at the bit just like we're chomping at the bit. I have to say, please, 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 if you are in a shelter-in-place kind of under one of those orders, please shelter in place. I lost somebody near and dear to me yesterday, not because of something that someone playing tennis did, but just because this crud is everywhere. And let's figure out how to get rid of it. Wash our hands. Don't put your hands to your face unless you've just washed them. And that's it. We'll be back tomorrow with another episode of Tennis 2020, Real People. Until then, I'm Dewey Evans. Have a wonderful day.